Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for all coming on a wet fall day. Our golden hour on the campus, for those of you who haven't been here before, is an hour during the week when there are no classes scheduled. And it gives an opportunity for the campus to invite speakers onto campus or to have people on campus make presentations on important issues for our liberal arts education. And today we want to welcome to our campus a Swedish journalist, Karin Henriksson, who is stationed in Washington, D.C., and she's been in the United States for 30 years. She is an author and journalist, and she has reported over the years from many countries around the world, most notably the United States, as a foreign correspondent for one of Sweden's leading national newspapers, the daily Svenska Dagbladet. Am I close? Sorry. If it was Spanish, I could kill it, but not Swedish. As well as many other Swedish media outlets. Widely respected as a foreign policy analyst, she also has written a number of books, including a biography of President Ronald Reagan and a recent one focusing on race relations in the United States during President Obama's tenure. Her latest book, which just appeared this month in Swedish, is the first ever biography of President Donald Trump. So this afternoon, she is going to give us a view from Europe because her research for this latest book was in Europe, and she spoke with many different people of different walks of life about their view of the United States and of President Trump, and she's going to share some of those reflections with us today that are in her book. So we welcome to Ripon College, Karin Henriksson.
Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. That's what you say in America, right? And also thanks for being here, and it's great. And I should also tell you that this is not my first visit to Ripon, maybe fourth or fifth or even more maybe, because my husband went here and graduated from here. So we've come back several times, and Brian was kind enough to mention the biography of Ronald Reagan, so obviously I mentioned Ripon in that book. And I've even tipped off some of my conservative Swedish friends to visit here so that they can see the birthplace of the Republican Party. So when you're a foreigner, or particularly maybe when you're European, you have to think a lot about the political spectrum. And the GOP, particularly the GOP today, would not be very big in Sweden, probably. There's always been that the Swedish political spectrum is way to the left of America. So that's just a fact, even though you could say that in Sweden, as in other European countries, there has been lately a growing right wing. So that's true for Sweden too. We used to have 5 parties, but now we have 8. And one of them is called the Sweden Democrats. And they are also, what do you say, nationalistic party, anti-immigration and so on. So let me look at my notes here, because in the Swedish schools, they don't learn, or they don't teach this public speaking the way you do here. I'm always very impressed with Americans being just very good at public speaking. So I was going to say that I was putting together a little list of the issues where I think that the disparities or the differences are the largest. So let me start with guns. Every time there is a mass shooting in America, the Swedes go, how is this possible? Can't they do something about it? And then us correspondents who live here, we say, well, that's a totally different attitude about guns, about the right to defend yourself. So I would put that as number 1 on my list of differences. And the second one is taxes and the role and size of government. And when Donald Trump, to mention him then for the first time, says that Sweden says that the United States has the highest taxes in the world, no. No, that is simply not true. Ask any Scandinavian. And then it's, of course, healthcare. Sweden has a national healthcare system. Healthcare is considered a right, and there's a large subsidies, so somebody who has a chronic disease doesn't have to pay a lot out of their own pocket. That's also just a fact. And then it's the role of the United Nations and other international organizations. So today is the UN Day. Did you know that? So I heard from a friend in Stockholm that the buses have little flags on to celebrate that this is UN Day. And okay, because you could say that Sweden is a small country, so Sweden needs to be part of something bigger to get its voice heard. But still, that is a huge difference, and I think that Swedes are in general disappointed in, the Security Council always having this power that small countries don't have. Next issue is, of course, climate. I think in all of Western Europe, there's agreement that something has to be done about the climate, and some would even say that this is not the right-left-wing issue anymore. There's broad consensus that it's not good to rape the environment, and that something has to be done. And then maybe I think that most Europeans really accept the science here, that man is part of the problem. And then maybe they're not as ambitious in terms of fighting it as they should be, but there is at least that perception that we should work to help the environment. And then if you look at what the Europeans are worried about after, with President Trump, then it's obviously the first issue would be the overall instability that we see in the world today. And secondly, it's the dangerous escalation of the North Korean issue, the way it's being, just the language between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un, there are a lot of people kind of comparing the two. That is very worrisome, that they're two unpredictable people in charge of very dangerous weapons. And the same with Iran. That is a very complicated issue, obviously, but I think that most Europeans would say, well, come on, we have this deal here. Why don't we stick to it and make it better? And then it's, particularly for Sweden, I mentioned it's a small country, it's very export-oriented, so the Swedish business community is very worried about the President Trump and his trade policies, whether America will become more protectionistic, whether NAFTA would be abolished, because Swedish companies have sort of adjusted to this three-country continent, how you work your sort of business flows to take advantage of that trade agreement. Next thing is obviously this whole populist wave that we're seeing. That's also worrisome to Europeans, because America has been like a beacon, right? There's been a lot of forceful movements that have started here that have been important for the rest of the world. I mean, the civil rights movement, you had that program yesterday, and same with homosexual, against discrimination, and now suddenly we see like the clock has turned back. That is very worrisome, because America has really been, I would say, a beacon here. And that is true also with America and foreign aid. Swedes believe in foreign aid. That's very much part of who we are. We want to help other people. So if America is not a strong voice there, that's not good. So anyway, next segment in my presentation here, so I've spent most of this year in the sort of mental company of Donald Trump. So I followed the campaign last year, and I followed many other presidential campaigns. It was obviously interesting to see how he differed from other candidates. And the book, just briefly, it's 16 chapters. It's chronological order, and from childhood to the presidency. And my deadline was September 1st. which was good in a way because I managed to get in like Steve Bannon's departure from the White House. But it was really sort of, now what has he done now? Add new paragraphs the whole time. And anyway, I just say that it starts with the quote, "I'm president, you're not," which he actually did say. So I just got back from a book tour in Sweden, and trust me, the questions were very critical and a lot of statements. How could the Americans vote for that guy? And then at one of the events, there was a person who asked me, "Can't you say anything positive about Donald Trump?" And I said, yes, of course. I mean, you could say that he did win the election, which was quite amazing, quite impressive that he did, and you could discuss the methods, but then it's negative campaigning and ugly campaigning. It's nothing new in American politics, right? So that's number one. And number two is that I think that he, even if he had lost, I mean, he did put a focus on a group and in American society that had been forgotten, right? And that he did focus on the fact that the manufacturing industry is shrinking. And then you could discuss his take on that, but the fact is there. The wages have been stagnating for 30, 40 years, and then maybe somebody who grew up in like a social democratic Sweden would maybe say, well, that's also because of the corporations who left the country or who pressed down the wages. But still, I mean, he did that. And then thirdly, I would say right now that he has gotten a lot of Americans, I think, to really ponder the American system, American society, forces that are there to correct or to correct the presidency. I mean, the president. I mean, the role of Congress, the role of the judiciary, and also the military, like now the controversy about the Niger operation. If Donald Trump hadn't said anything about that, maybe that would just have gone on. And now there's a lot of questions. Why are we in Africa? Why are we in that country? How many are there? So maybe that will be talked about a little more and investigated. So, and then I obviously have to say then that for me personally, what's been very negative is the attacks on the media. If you have worked, I mean, I've been a journalist for all of my life, working for a mainstream newspaper in the old traditional way. And to hear then that this is fake news, it's shocking, it's disturbing, and also it happens when the press or the media are really in a difficult situation already because of the business model is not there anymore. So to have a person that powerful to question the whole concept of the media is very disturbing. And then maybe if you ask me what as maybe was mentioned here, I mean, Brian said, so I've lived here for 30 years and worked here for 30 years. So I've covered 6 presidents from Ronald Reagan to Donald Trump. And if I had something to say about in the American political system, what I would like to change or what is disturbing me the most, I would say, first of all, voting rights. To me, it's just a mystery that not everybody gets a voting card in the mail in quite a few weeks before the election. Why is that impossible? That's happening in most other countries, even in Mexico. And then it's obviously the gerrymandering. It's a very strange thing to explain to the Swedish public. You know, you write an article, what is gerrymandering? Who was this Gary, I guess you pronounced it in those days. Why is this still there? And then healthcare, obviously, that is a very complicated issue, right? And that President Trump, that was a surprise to him. I think it was very strange for somebody who's tried to write articles about it for many, many years. And then it's the government bashing. That's very disturbing for somebody who lives in a country where the public sector is respected and regarded as necessary. So, I think I'll stop there. Is that okay?
Thank you very much, Karen. We'll now have an opportunity for you to react, make comments, and also ask questions. So what we'd ask you to do so that the sound system will be able to pick up your voice, if you would go to the microphone that's in the middle of the aisle and get within at least 6 inches of the microphone and go ahead and ask your questions or make your comments. We have about 20 minutes for exchange with the audience, so don't be bashful.
Could I just say one thing before the last bit? I forgot to mention. If this is an educational event, okay?
Yes, it is.
I would like to say that there are 3 books I would recommend. You know, that was part of my research that I think are very good, good books about the election year and what's happened since. And first of all, it's Joshua Green, a fellow journalist. His book, The Devil's Bargain, about the friendship and relationship between Donald Trump and Steve Bannon. It's very interesting and illuminating. And secondly, of course, is Hillary Clinton's book, What Happened. And I didn't talk about her, but people who know me know that I've always been rather skeptical about Hillary Clinton as a presidential candidate. So I think that it was really interesting how Donald Trump was able to exploit the questions about her that were present, maybe in communities like this here in Wisconsin and Illinois, and I mean in the countryside, or rural America, I guess you say. And thirdly is Joel Pollack. He's a journalist for Fox News and a political scientist called Larry Schweikart. Their book is called How Trump Won, and it's very illuminating about, the algorithms and this new data and also. Sorry, I forgot to mention it.
Thank you very much. I was going to ask you to think about the political changes that have occurred worldwide, not just simply in the United States, but also in Europe and in other areas, and to see if there's as much concern on the Swedish part about those as there may be with respect to what's happening in the United States, just simply to open up the discourse.
Okay. Well, there was a story in today's USA Today listing the politicians that are sort of mini Trumps in today's world. And as I mentioned early on, that in Sweden there's one of these parties too. And I think it's due to the fact that there's a lot of worries in the world. And here in America, there's been the immigration from the South, right? That's been issue for years. But in Europe, it's this wave after wave after wave of refugees. I mean, you see that maybe glimpses of it on TV here in America, but in Europe, it's really a very present issue. And Sweden has taken 350,000 or so refugees from other countries, and you could talk about it financially, of course. How can a country of close to 10 million absorb that many people? And also culturally, they are from a very different background, religion and culture. So there's a lot of strain on all European countries, I would say. And then to have America with a president who seems to not really accept these other cultures and religions is also not helpful, I think. So that is maybe the answer to your question, that unfortunately it would have been better right now with a president in America who had a little different take on things.
Thank you. Professor Mahoney.
Yeah, to follow up on that question, I wanted to, you talked about the similarities between the situation in the United States and the situation in Europe. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the differences and whether you think the similarities or the differences are more significant.
Okay, I think that thanks to the social welfare and the safety net, I think that in Europe is a little behind here, I think, when it comes to the manufacturing industry, and I think that in Sweden they've just started this exporting jobs to other countries, and I think personally that this will become more of an issue soon, and that right now maybe the fear of the other is more because of the refugee crisis and the wars in the Middle East. But next thing could be the pressure on the middle class. And so that is similar, I think. I mean, then you could say there's nothing new in Europe. There have been these, the steel industry is closed. I mean, when I lived in Europe, I was in, France and Belgium and reported on what was going on there. But then they had a very strong state, very strong welfare system, and that's maybe not quite true anymore. So there'll be more of that kind of despair, I guess you could say, hopelessness. Will our kids have a better future? I think that'll come more in Europe, and I think that maybe these parties reflect that. Even though today I think it's more because of the influx of people from other cultures.
More questions, comments? Gary, looks like you have a question.
Would you care to comment on the individualistic nature of U.S. culture versus European culture, and how that plays out into politics? And do Europeans not understand that? And if so, why? And do they think they should drop the parliamentary system and adopt the presidential system and so forth?
That's a very good question. Where to start? It's as you say, that it's two completely different systems, it's two mindsets. It's I think that the Swedes that I can speak to more than any other country, obviously, but I think this is a huge difference. I mean, take the union movement, for instance. It's still a very strong force in Europe, and I think that the European workers, the European middle class, has a better life thanks to that. And I have written hundreds of articles probably about the American union movement. And even though they say, the union leaders, join the union and you'll get better pay and better benefits, and still that's not happening, it's going the other way. And then you could say that maybe the Europeans should be more individualistic. Maybe that would be better for them. Maybe they would have more entrepreneurship if they were more of a, you're on your own, you have to defend your freedom. So I don't think right now that the two are, that the twain should meet. I don't think so.
Could you go to the microphone, please? Jerry, you were there first. Why don't you go ahead?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for coming here. I'd like to ask you about the Israeli-Palestinian issue. In the U.S., there are states passing laws against participating in the boycott, divest, and sanction movement. Texas has passed a law that they will not give any state funds to contractors who support BDS. There was a town, Dickinson, Texas, that was ravaged by the Hurricane Harvey, and they will not give relief funds to any citizen who does not sign a statement saying that they will not support BDS. and there are other states in the U.S. doing similar things. What is the response in Europe and in Sweden to the BDS movement?
Well, I have to confess, I'm not really, I don't really feel comfortable because I don't really know enough about that. But in Sweden as a whole, I think that traditionally there's been support for the Palestinians. It could be political reasons or leftist reasons, but it's been back and forth. And there are also, well, speaking of, yes, to say something very negative about Sweden today is that these right-wing parties have also allowed certain sentiments and that maybe were there before, but and then also with the new Muslim influx, there's been more anti-Semitism, which is very unpleasant, and you don't even want to know about it or hear about it, but it's happening. So that could maybe trigger debate more about how Sweden as a country should look at Israel and Palestinian cause. So, but as I said, I'm not really an expert on that. Sorry.
You began by talking about some of the things that Europeans might be shaking their heads about how the United States addresses things such as gun laws and medicines, healthcare, etc. And yet, and certainly in the United States, there's strong feelings about those issues on both sides too. Yet Trump did win, and I'm wondering what you think the opportunities would be for candidates such as Trump across Europe, mining the same feelings that you also acknowledged in your comments.
I think that partly, in America, the party system isn't as strong, so that's a reason why maybe Donald Trump, at least in the Scandinavian countries, would maybe not get that far, because the candidates really come up through the party structures. So whoever they put forward as a candidate for a party leader or prime minister would be somebody who has a background, who has had jobs or posts in the party, and maybe even in the previous government from that party. But I would say that Donald Trump will probably get more people to think, I should go into politics, I can solve this, we have to get rid of these politicians. That, I think, is something that is brewing in Europe also, and that maybe that is good. Maybe that's, the politicians aren't doing what we expect them to do, so maybe that is good, even though it's unfortunate that, if you believe that the prime example of this movement hasn't performed better, I think. Because if you said that you were going to solve all problems and have better and cheaper health care, then maybe we should see some movement in that direction. But as I said, I think that maybe that's one of the good things with Donald Trump's candidacy, that where A, politicians maybe don't do what they should do, and B, maybe we do need politicians because it is a particular job, it's a particular talent. You have to have a particular background, I think, to go through that, to learn and read all those papers and have opinions and act on them. And I don't think it's that easy, actually, to be a politician.
Good morning. First of all, thank you for coming to Ripon College to speak to us. It's a pleasure to have you here. You talked a little bit about the differences of the American attitude and Swedish attitude towards the United Nations. What specifically does a European country like Sweden look for from the UN? I mean, what does Sweden think that the UN's main objectives should be globally?
I think the Swedes think that there should be more influence for smaller countries. I think that the Swedish UN Swedish diplomats who've been posted at the UN, all of them, or many of them, have been working very hard on UN reform, by which they mean that they should maybe not get rid of the Security Council and the veto power, but at least expand the Security Council so there would be maybe 10 countries or 15 countries, and then some kind of rotating system, and then they're not happy with the veto power for the 5 post-World War II victors. That's very old-fashioned, I think. And then I think that they would like to deal more with the nuclear arms issue, that there should be more of disarmament. And then I suppose they would like to, I think that the Swedes are a little naive though there. They maybe think, they don't think in kind of power terms the way maybe a bigger country does. So I think that they have a bit of a naive vision, I think, about what the UN could do. But then the Swedish diplomat said, the UN cannot be better than its members, so maybe if all members were better, it would be a better UN, I don't know.
In America, the political campaigning has gotten longer and longer, and people are already starting to campaign for 2020, and there's a lot of money in politics. How is the European system different from what you're seeing in the United States?
Yes, what's interesting is that actually political campaigns in Sweden, they used to start like a month before the election, but not anymore. It's the next election is in September next year, and it started already. They're having party leader debates, and that is pretty new, I would say. So maybe they have been influenced by America, but there is money in politics, obviously, but it's different. A lot of it is through taxes, so the parties get, they get sort of subsidies, or they get money from the states according to how big they are. So, and then you could say the Swedes look at money in politics in America and say, how is that possible? How can they pay all this money? How can the corporations be so influential? But in Europe, I think in all of Western Europe, there are other forces that are as strong maybe as the corporations in America. The union movement, it's also, of course, the business community. So in Sweden, there's a very strong system where other forces influence. But okay, you could say that the business community is one of many, and even if it's powerful, it's probably not as powerful as here. But I think that is an area, I think, where the American way of politicking is sort of flowing over there. And also maybe it's not been that many years that Sweden instituted it used to be just a party. You voted for the party, and the party had decided the order of, they had put out the candidates. And then suddenly, maybe 10, 15 years ago, you could actually vote for the candidate. And that is new. So that will also mean that there will be more of individuals running. And that will change things too, I think. But then we haven't even mentioned religion. That's obviously another area where there are differences. And there you could say also that I think that at least in Sweden, the Christian party has become stronger than it used to be, and there's some talk about that the pro-life groups are getting money from America. So I think that there's maybe there's a globalization of politics too, I think.
We have time for one more question, if someone wants to come to the microphone. Thank you.
I have a question.
Professor Hannaford.
It may be irrelevant, but I wonder if Swedes are following the career of the new vice president, or do they sort of push that aside, saying, don't pay any attention at all to it, or is there an attempt to assess his talent, political talent?
You mean that, what do you mean?
Well, do you think, is there any attempt to judge his ability to take over as president?
Well, I was asked to write a story about the vice president and what his plans are. So, and then I think that in Sweden, I think that maybe some people would think that Mike Pence would be a more conservative president than Donald Trump. So be a little careful what you wish for. That then it would be more anti-abortion, it would be more Merry Christmas, and so. And yeah, that's what I think.
I don't have to be careful what I wish for on that score. There's a marvelous article in recent New Yorker by Jane Mayer, or Meyer, I'm not sure how she pronounced it, about Trump, and about, mostly, it's a profile of Pence. And it's, I think it dissolves his claim to be able to move.
Yeah, but isn't that they're also talking about that, why isn't Pence speaking up more? Why isn't he more active? Why is he doing this Nancy Reagan look when he looks at the president? And then some say that's because he owes Donald Trump. Mike Pence would not be the vice president if there had been another Republican candidate. So, power, right?
Well, thank you.
Karen, thank you. I have one final question. You've lived in this country 30 years. You've written books about presidents. You've written articles about the political system. You've identified today some of the positive things that have happened with President Trump and some of the things that concern Europeans. What advice would you give to American citizens at this point of our political history? What do you think we as the average citizen should be doing today in our political system, and particularly young people?
Well, you and I talked yesterday about this, the skepticism about the media, and apparently there are other opinion polls or polls out suggesting that Americans know more and less about the country and the political system. So maybe everybody needs a refresher course. But for me personally, I think that the voting rights, that would help, I think, if everybody voted, if everybody had a chance to vote without registering, or so I think that would be my suggestion, my humble suggestion.
Well, thank you very much for a very interesting conversation. Thank you all for coming. On behalf of the Center for Politics and the People that sponsored this, we thank you. Karen is going to have lunch in the Commons, so if anyone would like to continue the conversation with her, and David Schwartz is going to be there. Gary Yerke, who spoke last night, has to go to the Rotary Club this morning to talk about Ripon in the 1960s, but David is coming to lunch, and Karen. So if anyone would like to speak more with our guests, please come to us to the Commons. Thank you all very much for coming.